all and welcome to the workshop on Real Estate Regulation and Development Act 2016. As our endeavor to promote continuous legal education, we have been organizing workshops on various topics. Today's topic of workshop is Real Estate Regulation and Development Act 2016, which is extremely relevant. And in fact, there is an article in today's newspaper also that pursuant to RERA's warrant of attachment, a property in Mulund is going to be sold to recover flat purchasers' dues. So this topic is extremely relevant, and that's why we have organized a lecture today on Real Estate Regulation and Development Act 2016. We have in our esteemed panel Mr. JP Sen, Mr. Pradeep Sancheti, Mr. Ghelani and Mr. Badbade, who need no introduction as speakers in today's panel. May I now request Dr. Sathe to address our members, please.
Good morning, friends. In our endeavor for continuing legal education, which we started 6 years back when the present committee took over, we have received tremendous response. We have been organizing lectures, workshops on variety of subjects which are of importance to practitioners on daily basis, including current topical issues. Whenever we make a request to the learned judges or seniors or experts in the subject, we have immediately received positive response from them. They have accepted our request and been here to address the audience. Similarly, all of you have been giving tremendous response, and we always have a full house for these workshops. This morning, we have an interesting and topical issue, namely Real Estate and Development and Regulation Act, which is not a successor of MOFA, but it is a cognate act of MOFA, because MOFA is not repealed. MOFA continues to function, and MOFA and RERA have a joint regime today. To what extent they conflict, to what extent they overlap, to what extent MOFA is not applicable, all that will be debated and discussed this morning. This morning we have a faculty in Mr. Pradeep Sancheti, Senior Advocate, who is expert not only on this subject but on variety of other subjects. He had also been with us earlier on these workshops. So I welcome Mr. Pradeep Sancheti. I also welcome Mr. JP Sen, who also, as Bhushan said, needs no introduction. He has been doing lots of matters, both under MOFA as well as under RERA. So he will be sharing his expertise with us. Then we have Mr. Mahendra Ghelani, who is, as most of you will be familiar with this subject, is the architect of a celebrated judgment, Jayantilal Investment, which is a Bible on flat purchasers' right vis-a-vis the builder when the construction has commenced, and particularly interpretations of section 7 and 7A of MOFA. What are the repercussions of that today under RERA? So we will hear that. So I welcome Mr. Mahendra Ghelani. I also welcome Mr. Harshad Badbade, my friend, who is practicing in High Court, as well as majority of his work is related to MOFA and RERA. There is a bar at Real Estate Regulation Authority. He is the president of RERA Bar. So I welcome Harshad Badbade this morning in our midst. I welcome all of you, and without further, we start the proceedings. Thank you.
The workshop is divided into 3 topics. May I now request Mr. JP Sen to address our members on the first topic, which is reciprocal rights and obligations of promoters, flat purchasers and allottees.
This is, of course, a subject that is somewhat large to be covering in the time that we have allotted to it. I have, of course, been told, and I'm sure the other speakers have been as well, that we have 30 minutes to do what justice we can to the areas that we are addressing. So what I propose to do is to give as accurate and as brief an overview as possible of the aspects that I am dealing with. Now, initially, I think the question that we need to fully understand the Act and its implications is to ask ourselves what its purpose was. And RERA as a statute was designed to fill a gap. It was designed to fill the absence of a central enactment which regulated the real estate sector. That's really the demand that was sought to be addressed by RERA. There were statutes enacted by various governments, the Maharashtra Ownership Flats Act, or more popularly known as MOFA, in Maharashtra was one of them. There were some other state enactments as well. But the treatment of the real estate sector by these enactments was not uniform. So I suppose what was perceived was a crying need to have a single regulatory framework in the form of a central enactment, which is what RERA is supposed to fill. The legislative history, including the select committee reports, etc., reveal also the purpose or the objects that were sought to be achieved in enacting RERA. And the problems that were sought to be solved were multifarious. Some of them were the absence of bargaining power, or equal bargaining power between the flat buyer and the builder. It was perceived that negotiating power, in fact, was not in the hands of the buyer. It was in the hands of the promoter. And that balance is sought to be corrected by the provisions in RERA, one of the problems that was sought to be addressed. The other problem that was sought to be addressed was fund management. One of the problems that they perceived is that a promoter, he would start collecting money even before the plans are sanctioned, he would launch a project, the permissions may not be in place, large sums of money are collected, and those sums of money are not necessarily devoted to the project that had been launched. He may then devote it to some other business purpose, he may acquire some other property, he might sink it in some other project that is ongoing. So there was no means of guaranteeing as a matter of law that the money that he collected would in fact be devoted to the project for which it was collected. Equally, there was very little control as a matter of regulatory framework on changes that may be effected to plans, to promises, to specifications that were offered to the flat buyer at the time that a project was launched. Equally, there was no solution, at least realistically, to the issue of delay. If there was serious delay in providing a unit or in completing a project, realistically, there was no remedy. Of course, any contract between a flat buyer and a builder is a commercial contract like any other. So all of the remedies that are otherwise available in law would be available in respect of that as well. You could sue the promoter of a breach, you could seek compensation, you could conceivably seek a refund. One could say that all of those remedies were available. But those remedies are unwieldy because of the delays of the law, conceivably also because of the expense that may be involved in pursuing those solutions. So RERA is an attempt to try and solve these issues. And of course, MOFA in Maharashtra, may not be true of all the states, did seek to address some of these issues as well. And RERA follows in many ways the path that MOFA trod on. In some ways, it makes a departure. So I am dealing in the first heading that I'm going to address you on with the reciprocal rights and obligations as far as the buyer and the flat purchaser are concerned, the buyer and the promoter are concerned. Now, the first aspect in which, the first manner in which these problems that I delineated were sought to be addressed by the enactment was by a procedure for registration. Now, registration itself is an aspect that was addressed by sections 3 to 7, or 8 actually, of the Act. And effectively what it provides for, and there are several salutary aspects to this, what section 3, for example, provides for is a complete embargo on advertisement, sale or an offer for sale unless a project was registered under the provisions of the Act with the authority. So you could not collect money or you could not offer a premises for sale unless the process of registration was completed. Now the remaining provisions in the ones that I enumerated, 3 to 8, really buttress this prerequisite. An application is required to be made under section 4, and section 4 requires various disclosures which are the linchpin of the Act. So when a project is registered under section 4, you have among other things a long list in section 4 too. But among other things, you are required to disclose the sanctioned plans, you are required to disclose the permissions that are in place, you are required to disclose the specifications, the development works that are proposed, the particulars of the units that are to be sold in terms of size, in terms of character, is it commercial, is it residential. You are required to disclose the time within which the project is proposed to be completed. So all of the critical factors that might weigh in a consumer's decision to decide whether a unit ought to be purchased is what is required, therefore, to be part of the application for registration under Section 4. Now, Section 4 also requires, and it's an important aspect of the Act, where we talk about control over the funds that are collected by a builder, also requires that 70% of the sale proceeds that are received from the sale of units is then deposited in a separate designated account, and withdrawals from that account can be effected only in proportion to the work that is completed. The effort in this regard is to ensure that the money that is collected from a project, on a project being launched, is then dedicated or devoted for the purpose for which it is intended, namely the construction of the units that are being sold. And the withdrawals have to be supported by a certification by an engineer, by a chartered accountant, and by an architect. And there is also an audit process to ensure that these withdrawals that are sought to be made on the basis of this certification, in fact, are in accordance with the provisions of the Act. In other words, that the percentage of completion that is claimed is in fact effected. So that is the discipline that is sought to be effected by Section 4 and the application for registration. Section 5 is the grant, where the application that is made under Section 4 is then required to be considered by the authority. And to ensure that there isn't avoidable delay in the process, what Section 5 requires is that this consideration of grant or rejection has to be effected within a period of 30 days. And a refusal has to be preceded by notice. And in the event the 30 days passes by without a response, there is a deemed registration. So the attempt, at least at this stage, is to try and make the process as seamless as possible. The grant of registration is for the period of proposed date of completion. In other words, as I have indicated under Section 4, the promoter is required to indicate the date by which the project will be complete. The grant inures or the registration is valid for the period of completion that is proposed in the application or which is granted in the application. Which brings us naturally to the question, inevitably, of extension. What happens if the time that is indicated is not met and the period within which the promoter has indicated that the project would be complete is in fact not met? That is an issue that is addressed in Section 6. So there are very limited circumstances in which an extension can be granted. And the expression that is used by Section 6 is force majeure. And the explanation to Section 6 defines force majeure in a very narrow way, effectively virtually an act of God or something that is completely outside the control of the developer. So the only circumstances in which extension can be granted under Section 6 is if there are circumstances that don't constitute the default of the developer or the promoter and which effectively shares in the nature of force majeure. And there is a ceiling that is placed of 1 year on the extension that can be granted. In particular, you would not be able to say that regulatory delay is a reason for extension. You can't plead a delay in obtaining permissions, for example, in seeking an extension under Section 6. At least the language of the section doesn't appear to permit it. We are, of course, this is an act that is a work in progress. The law is still evolving. Many of these issues have not reached the High Court. So we are in that sense dealing with a state of the law in flux. Section 7 permits revocation. So extension in these limited circumstances, revocation only in the circumstances that are set out in that section, where effectively there is a default or there is a violation of the terms and conditions of the agreement, default of the Act, the provisions of the Act and the rules, or of the conditions on which the permission or the registration has been granted. There is also a omnibus unfair practices or irregularity clause. And if one looks at the explanation as to what constitutes unfair practices, they are essentially in the nature of misleading statements that are made as to capacity, as to affiliation, as to the quality of the services that are being provided, etc. So that's a residual clause that also permits revocation. Now, a revocation under Section 7 also triggers certain consequences. Of course, a revocation can be effected under the section only after notice has been given to the party. But in the event there is a revocation, the consequences that are provided for are one, of course, is a complete debarment in respect to the project. The access that is given to the developer in respect to the project is immediately withheld. There is a list of defaulters that is maintained on the authority's website. The promoter goes on it. The authority has the power then to take over the development of the project, which is incomplete. And there is a mechanism under Section 8 for the completion of that project that is otherwise incomplete. It can be either through the competent authority, through some other mechanism that is put in place by the authority, or importantly by the association of allottees, or the persons to whom premises or units have been allotted in the proposed project. And the section actually gives them what we refer to as a ROFR, or a right of first refusal. So there is a statutory preference that is given to associations of allottees to complete the project that is incomplete because of the default of the builder and because of the revocation of a registration. This is the mechanism that is put in place as far as registration is concerned. Now, when one speaks of default of obligations or a failure to perform in Section 7 and the consequences in Section 8, what sort of obligations are we talking about? And that's really what I was meant to address. And those obligations are also addressed in Sections 11 to 18 of the Act. And that's really the heart of the Act. In many ways, it resembles some of the provisions in MOFA. I'm sure Mr. Gilani will address that in far greater detail. I think he's addressing that aspect of it. The parallel between MOFA and RERA and what departures have been made by RERA from the Act. Now, Section 11 effectively is an obligation to inform. There is an obligation to update on the website on a quarterly basis, mainly regarding the bookings that have been effected, the status of approvals that have been granted, the status of the project itself. There are various other obligations that are highlighted or delineated in Section 11 as well. The obligation essentially would include the obtaining of an OC and a completion certificate. All of these are really speaking obvious. These are inherent to the completion of a project, but they have been statutorily defined in Section 11. To obtain an OC, to obtain a CC, to effectively transfer title, including by the means of a conveyance at the end of the day, to pay off or to discharge a debt that may have been taken or an encumbrance that may have been created on the project that is underway. So, to maintain essential services, to continue to discharge ongoing fiscal liabilities like property taxes until the actual transfer of the property is effected. All of these are obligations that are delineated in Section 11. And Section 11 also has one further important provision. It addresses the issue of the cancellation of an allotment. So, apart from the general duties that one would deem obvious of a promoter, and which is specifically described and which is necessary preconditions for the completion of a project and a handover, they also talk about the cancellation of an allotment being permissible only in accordance with the terms of the agreement. And the party that is aggrieved, in the event the allottee is of the view that the cancellation is not in accordance with the terms of the agreement that has been entered into with him, he has, of course, the remedy of an appeal. So these are the aspects that are addressed as far as Section 11 is concerned. Section 12 and Section 12, 14 and 18, really speaking, of course, tie in with the remedies that are provided for before the authority, and of course a further appeal before RIAT or the appellate tribunal. Section 12 is an obligation to ensure that every statement that is made, whether it is an advertisement, whether it is in a prospectus, or by way of a model apartment that you might offer for inspection to a prospective buyer, any representation of this character that is made by the promoter is accurate. That's the purpose of Section 12. Once again, an obvious proposition, but Section 12 also provides for the consequences of that obligation that is cast upon the promoter. So in the event there is a failure to meet that, in other words, a specification that is offered in respect of a flat, or a representation that is made in a brochure, a representation that is made in a prospectus, is not lived up to by the builder or the promoter, the consequences are defined in Section 12. Those consequences are twofold. It addresses the question or the situation where the buyer wishes to stay invested. It also addresses the situation where the buyer does not wish to stay invested. So if there is a breach of a representation and the buyer wishes to remain invested, he is entitled to be compensated for the loss that may be suffered as a result of that misrepresentation. And that, of course, is a quantification that will have to be done by the authority once he files a complaint. In the event the buyer does not wish to stay invested and he wishes to withdraw from the project, Section 12 provides that he would be entitled to a refund along with interest as prescribed, as well as compensation in addition if there is not a full recompense for the loss that he has suffered. So that Section 12 in that sense is an important fulcrum of the Act. Section 13 deals with the collection of money. And again, that was a necessary discipline that was sought to be imposed upon the real estate industry because there were no clear hallmarks in many states earlier as to when, at what stage and how much money could be collected by a promoter. What Section 13 seeks to do is to address that. And it says that no more than 10% can be collected of the value of a unit that is proposed to be sold until an agreement for sale is executed between the parties. And that's the discipline. Without a registered agreement for sale, no more than 10% is capable of being collected. And this agreement for sale, and that additional obligation is imposed in 13 as well, has to be in the prescribed form. And there is an annexed or a scheduled agreement. Now, there is a clarification to that schedule which says that variations can be effected to the agreement, and undoubtedly there may be project-specific changes that need to be effected to the agreement. But what is important is that there is also a clarification that any provision in the Act that is mandatory can't be departed from. So what it seeks to do essentially is to equalize to some degree the unequal bargaining power between the promoter and the buyer. So the promoter does not get free rein in terms of choosing the shape or the language or the tenor of the agreement that is entered into with the buyer. He is limited to some respects by the provisions of the Act. The Act provides something he can't provide to the contrary and get away with it. So that is the specific provision regarding an agreement for sale that is provided for in the statute itself. Now, Section 13 also stipulates that in the event that there is a provision that is inconsistent, then that to that extent or to the extent of that inconsistency, that provision or the agreement will be void. Now, Section 14 imposes the obligation to construct in accordance with the sanctioned plans, with the layouts and the specifications that have been offered, described or advertised. Now, can you make departures from this? And that's one of the questions that is sought to be addressed in the framework that has been handed over to us. It can, but with a great deal of caveats. If we are talking about individual units that are proposed to be sold, there is no change that can be effected by a promoter after an agreement for sale that is entered into, except for what is described in the Act itself is a minor addition or alteration. And that is a minor addition or alteration that is to be certified by an architect or an engineer. This is the first limitation that imposes constraints on what changes can be effected. There is also an explanation which talks about what a minor change or alteration can constitute. Anything that resembles a structural change would appear to be anathema and fall foul of the explanation to this section. So as far as individual units sold to allottees are concerned, very limited right to change anything except for what is described as minor additions and alterations. As far as the project as a whole is concerned, and you have a large number of allottees who have already acquired units, and the promoter wishes to effect a change, and this is one of the departures from MOFA which requires unanimity, this Act requires a two-third assent of the persons to whom allotments have been made, and two-third allottees except for the promoter himself. So we are talking about non-promoter allottees and two-third assent to be given by them, and there is also an explanation which says that all related allottees will have to be treated as one, etc. It's not too important. But the heart of it is that any change that can be effected can be only with the majority that is specified in the Act. And these are the limited circumstances in which changes can be effected once the registration has gone through. Once you have registered a project and you have offered sanctioned plans and layouts, these are the only circumstances in which a change can be made. Section 15 imposes constraints on a transfer of the rights of a promoter. So majority control of a project can be transferred by a promoter only subject to the constraints in Section 15. Once again, a two-third consent of the persons to whom units have been allotted, and the consent of the authority in addition. of RERA is required before a person can hand on a project. If these conditions are met and the transfer is then effected of a project from one promoter to another, the promoter to whom the transfer has been effected, in other words, the transferee, would then be subject to all of the constraints and all of the discipline that the Act and the agreements that have already been entered into impose. So no transfer can prejudice under Section 15 the rights of persons to whom allotments have already been effected. Their rights are fully protected. The only difference is the person who has entered into the shoes of the earlier transferor will now perform those obligations qua the allottees and give them the flats that they were promised. Equally, the Act is also careful to say that extension cannot be sought on the ground of a transfer having been effected of development rights or a promoter having changed character. The new promoter or the transferee of the development rights cannot then claim an extension only on the ground of the transfer. So Section 15 imposes that limitation as well. 16, of course, talks about the securing title and construction at its cost and transferring to the association of allottees at the time of the agreement for sale. So that, in that sense, is already reflected in Section 11, but it's reiterated in Section 16 as well. Section 17, of course, is also ancillary to that. It talks about the execution of a conveyance within 3 months of an OC being received. So once the occupation certificate is in place, there is an obligation within 3 months of that event having occurred for the execution of a conveyance, common areas, of course, to the association of allottees and the units to the allottees themselves, and to hand over physical possession to the society or condominium, as the case may be, that may be formed in respect of the units that are proposed to be sold. Equally, after the completion certificate, there is an obligation to hand over all documents, etc., plans to the association of allottees within 30 days of the completion certificate being received. The last in the series of obligations is Section 18. And that is also a particularly critical one because of the inadequacy of the legal mechanisms or machinery that were earlier available to address that issue. And that is the issue of delay. What Section 18 provides for is that in the event of any delay to give possession in accordance with the agreement for sale, which would have stipulated a date, the buyer again has the option to stay invested. In the event he chooses to stay invested, he can claim interest for every month of delay as provided for in Section 18. If he chooses not to stay invested, and in the event of, in the light of the delay in handing over the project, he chooses to withdraw from the project, then he is entitled to a refund along with interest. Section 18 also provides for compensation of any laws arising from a breach in title, as well as compensation for breaches of the provisions of the Act and of the agreements for sale. So this effectively is a summary of the obligations that are imposed upon the promoter. The mechanism, the authority itself with the appeal, are remedies, statutory remedies provided for under the Act, which will be addressed by one of the other speakers. Now, just one issue that I wanted to touch upon before I closed is the Act is fairly easy to administer in respect of projects that have not yet begun on the date of commencement of the Act. The path itself is fairly clear. You have to register in the event of breach. The consequences are provided for. The thorny issues that have been arising before the authority and before the appellate tribunal, and that is the bulk of the issues that are arising just now, is in respect of ongoing projects. Because not only does the statute require registration of projects that are new, in other words, that commence after the date of the Act, it also requires registration of projects that are ongoing, in respect of which an occupation certificate and a completion certificate have not been received. So if a project is incomplete on the date of commencement of the Act, that is also required to be registered. And it is in respect of this that a large number of issues, and perhaps Mr. Barbade will confirm that as well, has arisen both in RERA and in REACT. Because one of the issues that arise is the prospective or retrospective application of the Act. And the High Court, of course, had the occasion to consider the constitutional validity of the Act and upholding it. There are observations in the judgment which are capable of being read both ways. It uses the expression retroactive, it uses the expression retrospective in some places. It suggests that the provisions are not retrospective. So there is some degree of confusion in respect of that. And that confusion is also reflected in orders that have come from the tribunals in Delhi and in Bombay. Both the tribunals in some judgments in Delhi and in Bombay have taken the view that it is not retrospective. That the obligations that are provided for in Section 12, Section 14 and Section 18 cannot be enforced in respect of projects that are ongoing. The Appellate Tribunal in Mumbai has taken a different view in a recent judgment. We don't have the benefit of a copy of that judgment yet. So we will have to see what reasons they ascribe to hold that it is in fact retrospective. So that is the main battleground. Because if, for example, representations had been made in a or a prospectus well prior to the coming into force of the Act, that the project would be completed by a particular date. And once the Act comes into force, that project is required to be registered because it is incomplete. And the promoter has the opportunity at this stage, when registering the project, to indicate the date by which the project will be complete. Is he to be held to the representation that he initially made in the prospectus or the agreement? Or is he to be held to the date that he indicates at the time of registration? And that has been one of the ongoing debates. Still, there is some degree of confusion, some degree of ambiguity. And the argument, of course, for a retrospective application is that this being, in that sense, a welfare legislation that is intended to protect the rights of buyers, why should builders not be held to representations made even prior to the coming into force of the Act? And why should the consequences not follow? And the other way of looking at it is to say that it's always been settled law that vested rights or vested obligations cannot be altered by a statute unless there is express language that says so. And that in the absence of any express language in the Act, these provisions ought not to be made applicable to representations made well prior to the coming into force of the Act. And that debate in that sense is very live. And there are orders that point both ways, and perhaps at some issue on which light will soon be cast by RIAT and eventually by the High Court as well, when the issue is carried there. Thank you very much. I hope I haven't overrun my allotted 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Sen, for giving us a broad overview of the Act and telling us about what are the exact rights which are available to a flat purchaser under RERA. The next logical question, obviously, is after knowing the rights of flat purchaser, is how are those rights to be exercised under RERA, as there are various remedies provided under RERA for exercising those rights. And therefore, we have the second topic, which is remedies under RERA. May I now request Mr. Sancheti to address our members on the second topic.
Morning, friends, colleagues. Thanks to my friend Dr. Sathe and Dr. Saraf for giving me this opportunity to share my views. We are talking about remedies. Many of us are regulars in the High Court here. And pre-RERA, if a client came to you and said, I bought a flat 5 years back, 10 years back, I haven't yet got my possession, what do I do? You said, file a suit. You move the court, you got an ad interim. If you were lucky, after 6 months, 1 year, you got an interim order, but did you get possession? Possibly no. In many cases, yes, but I'm saying that was not a solution generally. Many suits were pending for a long, long time. The closest approximation to remedies under RERA, if I may give a very raw or a rough and ready example, is what you would have seen happen in Code 20 below here. If there is an authority, if there is a person who can control all, who can control the promoters, the developers, the builders as one body, the users, the flat purchasers, the end buyers as another body, the authorities who are to give permissions, approvals, occupation certificates as third body, because very often possession was not given because that authority was not doing what it was supposed to do. Of course, builders were very often on the wrong side of the stick. And then sometimes even the flat purchasers as a body may be coming in the way, which you must have experienced in some cases. So this is now one-stop shop for all your possible remedies, not to say that your consumer forum and insolvency code is out. I'm not on that, but otherwise. So when you are talking of remedies under RERA, firstly, for whom are the remedies available?
The remedies are available to all the concerned participants, including the builders, promoters, and developers. Secondly, as Mr. Sen has now explained to you the rights under section 12, 14, 18, and 19. 12, 14, 18 are essentially only rights available to the flat purchasers or owners or buyers. 19 is rights and obligations both. But as he has explained those rights, to exercise those rights, to enforce those rights, the authority that you have or the process that you have first is to file a complaint under 31. Then based on your complaint under 31, whatever claims or compensations that you have under 12, 14, 18 or 19 will be adjudicated by an officer under 71 whose designation itself is adjudication officer. So that's one set of remedies. That is for claims and compensation under 12, 14, 18, 19, essentially for the buyers. I'll come to the details. The adjudication officer here is a person of the designation or of the same position as a district judge. He is supposed to dispose of the complaint within 60 days. So you see the time difference. How good they are functioning, as Mr. Sen said, whether they are taking an interpretation which is conducive to what the intention of the act was is a bit of question mark today. But I am sure in due course it will be threshed out. So on one hand, you have these rights. The rights, as Mr. Sen explained, are to seek possession, are to seek compensation, are to seek interest, or a combination of these factors for various reasons under 12, 14, 18, 19 that you have seen by now. All these rights, as a purchaser, you can file a complaint that will go to the adjudication officer under 71 and he is supposed to dispose it off within 60 days. In a given case, if he cannot, then he must give reasons why he is not able to do it. So by and large, he is supposed to do it within 60 days' time. That's one set of rights, one set of remedies available. But what is the larger perspective? How is it that the authority itself is a robust mechanism for all rights and all remedies? We have been told about registration. Unless you register yourself as a promoter or a developer, you can't do the business. Unless you register a particular project under RERA, you can't sell anything under that project. That's the beginning. Purpose of registration is to control, so that once you register, then all your details, concerned person, promoter's name, etc., everybody who's responsible comes on board. If you do not do or comply with your obligations, or if you don't discharge the functions that you're supposed to do, one of the remedies is your registration will be cancelled. If your registration is cancelled, that means you cannot be a promoter anymore. If your registration of a particular project is cancelled, that means you can't sell under that project anymore. So first remedy is, amongst others, but first remedy that the authority can exercise is to cancel the registration, if it goes this far. But before you go into cancellation, how do you control? So the control is something like this. Sections 32, 33, 34 define what are the functions of the RERA authority. It is distinct from the adjudicating authority under 71. The functions largely are to say everything that is required to be done to create an environment in each state, because this is a statewide authority, to make or progress the housing sector develop. Housing would obviously include office spaces, commercial spaces, shops, everything in that sense. Idea is to promote the industry, idea is to give maximum housing to everybody. So they can control all players in the market, to the extent that they can even call upon the statutory authorities. Why are you not doing this, or why are you not doing that? Why are you not giving permissions? Why are you holding on to permissions? Why are you sitting tight on it? This is part of the functions of this authority. One of the functions also is to advise the state government. Of course, the advice is not binding, it's only advisory, it's not binding. But the functions go this far. Just as you can file a complaint under section 31 to say that I have not got possession of my flat, but you can file a complaint on any aspect covered under the RERA Act, covered under the functions of the RERA authority, which possibly has not been explored in that detail so far, because everybody is looking from the point of view of end user. But supposing a builder were to say that, look, I have given, my building is ready, it's ready for 6 months, I have applied for OC, it's not being given, you can go. Because the statutory authority is not doing what it is supposed to do. And under 32B or 32C, the authority here can possibly ask questions, why are you not doing it? So, any complaint that you have in relation to what is covered under the functions of the regulatory authority's functions, that complaint also is filed under section 31. That complaint is then taken up by the authority under 35. So the authority entertains your complaint under 35, section 35. So that's how there is two parallel provisions. One is in relation to compensation, that is interest, penalty, etc., which goes under 71 to adjudicating authority. Everything else goes back to the regulatory authority. So regulatory authority also entertains complaints and passes the orders. Now, how they have virtually created a parallel mechanism to what the courts were supposed to do, or to what a one window mechanism in our court was doing, as we all know, is to say something like this. The regulatory authority as well as the adjudicating authority, they have all the powers of a civil court, which means summoning witnesses, calling people, calling for records, calling for information, so that you know what is what. But at the same time, not bound by the rules of evidence. Because if you have to finish the matter in 60 days, obviously, you can't ask for oral evidence and proof of documents. Now, how that is facilitated, in my view, is very, very simple. When you register a project, you're supposed to give all the details. And it's mandate under the law that the project details must be then displayed on the website of the RERA authority. So if I say I'll finish in 6 months, my standards will be ABC, my permissions are XYZ, all that is now displayed on the website of the authority. Do you need further evidence to prove it? No. What is your agreement? If it is a registered document that is there, do you need anything more to prove it? No. At this stage when you go for claim or compensation, if delay has happened and if the project has not delivered, do you need to prove something more? So they are trying to make it look very simple, very obvious in a very simple fashion. And just a digression, I would suggest, even if you are personally a buyer or if you are advising somebody, if you invest in a project, not I'm talking as a money investor, but as a buyer, etc., please take a printout of that website every 1 or 2 or 3 months and keep it, because sometimes what is uploaded can change and they are allowed to change it from time to time. So you may not know after 2 years that it was there 2 years back. Keep it. It's also very helpful to you, because if you see the project derailing or if you see changes happening, you are not supposed to wait till the end. Supposing somebody says, I'll give you the project or I'll give you the possession after 2 years, you don't have to wait till 2 years. The phase-wise development will be shown. If not shown, you can ask for the phases. Supposing he says, I'll complete the construction of the structure of the building in 1 year and fitments and everything else in next 1 year. But at the end of 15 months, you find that he has done only 3 floors and not the 20 floors that he's supposed to do. You can go to the authority then and there. I see the delay. So if you keep yourself aware and updated, then you can exercise your rights and remedies more meaningfully. Therefore, keep that website. That website is a proof, because you have uploaded this. The builder has uploaded it. The promoter has uploaded it on the website. That website is a proof of his declaration to the authority, which is available to public at large, on which you are entitled to rely upon. That is one proof. Your agreement is another proof, and the fact where project today is the third proof. What more do you need? Now, the rights that you have, depending upon under which section you are falling under, 12, 14, 18, 19, etc., could be to say that plans must be adhered to, could be to say deliver me possession in time. Could be to say, you have done something, I am not interested in the project, allow me to walk out. Could be to say, I will continue in the project, but please pay me interest. There is a provision under, I think, 18, if I am not wrong, pay interest on month-to-month basis. Supposing you were to deliver in 2 years and now you say, I'll take 3.5 years, then give me interest on month-to-month basis. It remains to be seen how effectively the authorities ultimately discharge this function, but that right can be enforced and you have a remedy for that under 18 read with 71. Therefore, you can also say, if somebody, if a particular organization is closed down, in the sense they close down that project, you can say not only I want my money back with interest, but I want compensation. Because if I had bought it somewhere else, I would have got my residence or my office by today and I would have been using that place. So not only, even if you say, I want to withdraw or I am withdrawing, that doesn't mean that you will only get money back with interest, you can get compensation also. And then there are procedures or there are standards prescribed how to determine compensation, that's under 72. 3 or 4 factors. The first being the unlawful gain, if any, by the promoter. 2 is the loss caused to the user or the investor or the buyer. 3 is what is the market position generally. And 4 is the repeat nature of offense. Has this happened first time because of some reason, or this has happened repeated number of times? Then that could be another reason. Now, interestingly enough, and therefore I am saying this is almost at par with the court mechanism, except how they deliver is yet to be seen. The order of the adjudicating authority under section will be treated as a decree of the court. So you enforce it in the same fashion as a decree of a civil court. A step further, if you have experienced this in the course of execution of decrees, which as we all know is a chapter by itself, sometimes there is a matter of priority, sometimes who has got a higher right, sometimes somebody has got a prior attachment, somebody has got a prior mortgage charge, etc., etc. This decree or recovery of this amount will be treated as recovery of the revenue areas. So this is slightly on a higher footing than a normal civil decree in terms of rights when you are executing the decree. Now, it's a 3-level process. On level 1, you have either the adjudicating authority on one side or the regulatory authority on the other side, depending upon which subject you are. As I said, for many things which are under the control of regulatory authority, except the compensation under 12, 14, 18, 19, then complaint will go there, including a promoter's complaint that under 19, the purchaser is supposed to pay me installments, he is not paying. He can go there. He can't go under 12, 14. He'll go there. Now, all this is step number 1 on either side. Step 2 is from both these authorities, there is a statutory appeal provided to an appellate authority. That appellate authority is a tribunal, appellate tribunal, if I use the term, which has both judicial and technical members. I believe presently the authority has 3 members, 2 judicial and 1 technical, but there must be at least 1 judicial and 1 technical. That functions like a regular or first appeal, if I use that term, regular appellate authority. This authority also correspondingly has all the powers of a civil court in terms of summoning witnesses, documents, information, etc., etc., etc. Not bound by the rules of evidence, because if in the ground stage you are not, in the appellate stage you can't be. The decree, the order of this authority is also a decree of the civil court in the same fashion and executable in the same fashion with the same priority. So that's your next level in terms of how you enforce that remedy. You still have one more level. What we have so far learnt under CPC second appeal, exactly the same. There is an appeal to the High Court under section 58, and that section says an appeal shall lie in the same manner as it lies under section 100 of the CPC. So you have a second appeal. Mr. Sen raised that point on interpretation of prospective retrospective. Some of the authorities today are saying that no, this doesn't apply to you. Of course, I am strongly of the view that such an interpretation is not conducive to and not in consonance with what the Act says. But on a question of law, you come to the High Court, it will be settled in no time. That should a builder who gave a particular advertisement, a brochure or something on its website, he promised something, should he be allowed to go back on that only by saying that at the time RERA was not applicable? You will have an answer. What I'm trying to say is, as a matter of law, if any issue arises on interpretation, and by now we all know second appeal, though it's said to be question of law, but question of law is then ultimately turned on given facts and interpretation of facts, etc. So all those doors and windows will be available even within the mechanism of a second appeal, subject to how best a lawyer is able to convert them into a question of law presentable under Section 100. That takes me to one last area, and I'm going fast because I know the other two speakers are waiting here and we all have allotted time limits. What about because when you go into a project, you go into a project knowing fully well that I am buying from so-and-so promoter. The promoter's name very often is important to the buyer because he knows about his quality, about his ability to deliver, about his goodwill, etc., etc. And can they change hands as they like, when they like? The answer is obviously no, they cannot. Then how is it to be done, if at all? Mr. Sen very briefly indicated that yes, if you want to do it, you need permission of 2/3 of the buyers, and also in addition the permission of the authority. Now in terms of buyers or owners, if the promoter himself has bought something, that's to be excluded. Also, if there is a block booking in the sense of family or related people, that can be treated as one, so that nobody can kind of scuttle the whole process. But this has now been further detailed in a recent notification issued by the state government, 4th of June. They have explained what kind of different things of takeovers or changes are permissible without going to these permissions, and which are otherwise. The first one, I'm a little skeptical, but that's how it is. Supposing you bought a flat from a very well-known builder, ABC Developers. If there is a change in shareholding of that company, which means if ABC represented the actual developers, ABC have gone out and D and F come, nothing can be done because there is no change in promoter. The promoter is ABC Developers. Maybe the shareholders behind have changed. This clarification says that does not need any permission because promoter remains the same. Equally, if a sole proprietorship becomes partnership, limited partnership, company, or any of these, those are not change in promoter that is permitted, which I think is in consonance because that's what it is. There are two other areas they have covered. If there is an amalgamation or a merger of a company, they have broken into two parts. If it is voluntary, then it's change. Then you need permissions. If it is involuntary, for example, if the promoter had done securitization with some bank, some financial institution, or some such scheme, or otherwise for any other reason, if you have to do it, they will still consider it as a change, but they say that the the bank or financial institution, etc., would then, as and when they exercise their rights, they will intimate, the promoter will intimate first when he feels that they might exercise the rights, which means he knows I'm somewhere near default. The banks, institutions, etc., when they exercise their right, they'll intimate, and as and when a new builder comes, obviously, or new developer, new promoter comes, obviously he'll take the permission. What is the most in terms of protection of rights is, he will still have to agree to three things. So what, he is coming in place of somebody who has failed or otherwise, he is still bound by all the promises which the original person has made to all the buyers. Two, he will comply with all the obligations to the authority under the Act. He cannot seek any relaxation because he is now coming in. And three, he is required to give an undertaking in writing to this effect. That makes it all the more clear that when he comes in and he has given that undertaking in writing, then there is no scope for him in future, if a dispute were to arise, to say, I did not mean this, I did not mean that, I did not know this, I did not know that. You are bound by all, you are bound to know about it all. So that's how they have, in brief, tried to create a very robust mechanism. But I must share with you, and I was talking to my friend here also because he's more well-versed in terms of actual working of the authority. We must all collectively ensure, and I'm sure we all will have some role or the other to play in different stages, that these authorities, right from appointment to discharge of duties, act in a very robust fashion. And this I'm saying with some experience, because when the regulations by the state government were being framed, they are supposed to invite objections. IMC had kept a lecture inviting objections. Some speakers were invited. I was also included in that. Mr. Gautam Chatterjee, then the person who was drafting, he was there. And there was a serious debate. Why should all this be displayed on the website? Why should we clutter the website with all this? I'm sure you understand. And I said openly, you have only to make the space available on website, which is not in shortage. Whatever the Act postulates, why do you want to cut it down or curtail? Say, put everything. What's your difficulty? Because the more he discloses, the more transparency, the more he is bound. So the effort, while the Central Act envisages something else, the effort may not be matching at all times. I'm not on one person or one authority or one government. So we must all collectively ensure that the robust mechanism which is there on paper today is translated into a reality so that the rights and remedies are real. Thank you all for giving me this chance.
Thank you, Mr. Sancheti, for giving us the practical working of remedies under the RERA Act. And the best explanation of RERA Act was how Courtroom number 20 gives you a quicker remedy in a flat purchaser's suit. RERA can be that faster. Thank you, Mr. Sancheti. We will have a short tea break of 5 minutes. May I all request you to assemble in exact 5 minutes here. We'll have to hear Mr. Gilani. Thank you. We now come to the third topic of today's workshop, which is the interplay between a state law, which is Maharashtra Ownership of Flats Act, which was in existence before RERA came into force. Now you are all aware that in state of Maharashtra at least, that MOFA was sought to be repealed by another act in 2012, which is a state act. And later on, this act has come into force, which has repealed a 2012 state act. This is a central law, later central law. So we have Mr. Gilani to address us on the third topic, which is the interplay between MOFA and RERA. Mr. Gilani, as you all know, is a senior solicitor. He has recently completed his 50 years as a solicitor and he was recently felicitated. May I request Mr. Gilani now to address us on the third topic.
Good afternoon, friends. I start with first thanking my friends, our President Shri Milind Sathe and Biren Sharaf for having thought of giving me this rare opportunity of addressing you all. In fact, when Biren phoned me whether I will on this subject, I was a little surprised. I think it's a myth which some of us created or carried. I did have and do have sufficient familiarity with MOFA, but I must confess that when it came to RERA, I cannot claim the same when Biren phoned me. In fact, I remember that in 2016 when RERA came, my friend Mr. Ramani, who wrote a book immediately and published it, sent it to me with a request to give his comments. He's still waiting. But anyway, I must thank Viren because then it gave me an opportunity to go through the provisions because I have to face you all and acquaint myself as much as I can. So pardon me if I make some lapses, but I think I've made efforts to do justice to the topics assigned to me, which are rights and obligations under MOFA, post-RERA, deemed conveyance, and concurrent remedies under MOFA, RERA, civil courts, consumer forums, and if I may add, with the permission of Mr. Sate, NCLT also, which has been an additional issue which has come about with this. We'll take first the rights and obligations under MOFA, as in the prelude was mentioned. And as was mentioned by Mr. Sen in his initial. RERA is an evolving process. We of course all have seen, as lawyers and otherwise, everybody is familiar with the adage, Jar Jamin ne Joru, Ekajiya na Choru. So, translated in English, property is one of the three major sources of conflicts and controversies. And that's a boon for all of us here who are practicing and who are to start practicing. In this context, the three enactments came about so far as Maharashtra is concerned. The Maharashtra MOFA, what we popularly known, then Apartment Ownership Act, and then in 2000 came an act called Maharashtra Housing RD Act, Housing Regulation and Development Act, 2012. Somehow, however, that Act of 2012 was not brought into force in its entirety, and only certain limited sections were brought into force in the year 2014. I must thank Mr. Sate to point me out those provisions while we were sitting on the dais, because a lot of confusion has arisen in the minds of many on account of the 2012 Act, which contains a provision for repeal of MOFA. And the repeal of MOFA contained in that Act itself has been repealed by RERA. The moot question, therefore, that arises and bothers everyone is whether by repeal of a repealing Act, what is the effect of that? Does that have an effect of reviving the previous Act which was repealed, or not? All those questions, however, I believe there have been several articles appearing on the website also, where many eminent practitioners have given an opinion that by virtue of Section 6 of the General Clauses Act, which says that the repeal does not resurrect the repealed Act, and therefore, by virtue of repeal of a repealing Act, the MOFA has come to an end. And that created a lot of tension and confusion, particularly in the context of rights and obligations, its enforcement, provisions under 17 which says local laws, and so on. And more so in the context of deemed conveyance provisions. What, while doing so, was overlooked was that the repealing section under 2012 Act was never brought into force. It was one of the sections not included in the sections which were brought into force in 2014. Therefore, if there was no repeal, there was no question of Section 6 of the General Clauses Act coming into force, and therefore MOFA being contended to be repealed. One can say it with confidence, therefore, that there ought not to be any confusion with regard to the continuation of the MOFA, subject of course to the qualifications under RERA. It does not continue to be in force in all its force, only to the extent it is not inconsistent, but nonetheless it does continue to be in force. And the present chairman, Mr. Gautam Chatterjee, has in fact publicly in several seminars confirmed this position, and also on their website has confirmed in answers to the frequently asked questions also that MOFA continues to apply within the circumspection of the provisions of the RERA. Therefore, friends, let us not have any confusion with regard to the applicability of MOFA to the extent, and therefore deal with the matters arising in the context of MOFA, which is not inconsistent with the provisions of RERA. There are several charts which have been published and are available on charts, so I will not labor and waste your time with regard to illustrating what are the provisions, to what extent there have been changes brought about in RERA. For example, instead of 4 months, there is 3 months under 17 and so on, and few other things and so on. Then we come to the question of, therefore, deemed conveyance. That has been a subject matter of a lot of issues and controversies and litigations. Our courts are flooded with several petitions challenging the deemed conveyance orders. And I'm sure our colleagues practicing in that field have been experiencing various issues with regard to the provisions, applicability of the provisions of deemed conveyance. All these issues arise out of two aspects. One is the contract. In good old days, under the provisions of MOFA, though there was a model form prescribed, we as solicitors and the advocates used to have agreements running into several pages and 100 clauses, which sought to bring about some kind of deviations from what the Act intended. Also, the questions came about from the provisions of the Transfer of Property Act. There are provisions under the Transfer of Property Act which provides for exceptions, reservations, the manner in which the transfers are to be effected, and whether a transfer only covers the question of a conveyance or a grant of a lease. Because some of the contentions, I believe, with regard to deemed conveyance raised also were that it gives the powers only to give a conveyance and not a lease. Again, another misconception. Let us be clear on that aspect, that what is sought to be conveyed by the provisions of 11 and now 17 is the transfer of title. Though, of course, the term conveyance is mentioned under the earlier one, also under the present one, which is where the evolvement of the legislation comes. I'll divert a little bit why this has happened, because all our previous legislations were based more or less or incorporated or adapted from the English laws. And therefore, there was some kind of a ready-made structure which was then adapted to the Indian environment. If you will go into the Contract Act, Succession Act, so various Transfer of Property Act and many others. It was, however, when RERA is brought in, or earlier to that even the MOFA was brought in, there was no such set precedent or a base on the basis of which it was. And therefore, it was kind of a organic mechanism. Certain thoughts were there, certain policies were there, certain ideas were there, which were sought to be brought in and implemented by virtue of that legislation improvised now by the RERA legislation. And therefore, human errors do creep in, and the process of evolution therefore goes in either in practice or by judicial pronouncements. And therefore, when we deal with the provisions of RERA, we deal with them in the context of the objects with which these provisions have been brought in and what is sought to be achieved thereby. And this principle has been accepted and adopted by the courts while interpreting these provisions in various its judgments. Therefore, coming back to the question of deemed conveyance and the provisions of the Transfer of Property Act, exceptions and reservations contained under the Transfer of Property Act, and how they can be incorporated. For example, if it's a larger piece of land, the owner has a bungalow on that. When he has entered into an agreement with the developer, he has retained rights with regard to the bungalow and the rest is developed. And then the provisions of FSI of the entire plot is consumed. Tricky questions come about as to how the conveyance will happen or what will happen. There may be inbuilt provisions which says that you will grant a conveyance and then grant a simultaneous lease of that portion which the owner has retained and so on. Now, these are the intricacies which the officers who are entrusted with the task of exercising the discretion in granting the certificate may or may not be familiar with. And at times, by just following the provisions of the sections at its bare face value, orders are passed, where the courts are then required to intervene. And there have been judgments now which says that unless such issues which arise are determined, it is not appropriate for the authority to use their discretion and grant the certificate. Now the question still remains, is the officer competent to decide these tricky questions with regard to the title and so on? Now that's an area which then gives all of us a green field, and the court with the task of then deciding whether the discretion was exercised appropriately or not. But in sum and substance still, the provision of deemed conveyance under 11, which continues even after the introduction of RERA, is a great boon in view of the rampant neglect on the part of the builders, just in not bothering to give conveyance. At times it may be due to the fact that the developer himself is not the owner. He may have obtained the rights from others. Now others may have an interest in conveying, not have an interest. They have some outstanding issues. There have been successive deaths. Somebody is available, somebody is not available. And several practical issues and questions came about. But nonetheless, by virtue of this provision, despite the difficulties experienced in getting the certificate and getting the deemed conveyance, the time that it takes and so on, it's still a very, very beneficial provision which has been brought in and mercifully continued under RERA with some variations. Now we come to the aspect of the concurrent remedies under MOFA, RERA, civil courts, consumer forum, and as I said, the NCLT. There is also one more which is not directly mentioned, but which has been brought in practice by Mr. Chatterjee along with the assistance from various leaders of the construction industry in Maharashtra. And they have brought in practice what is called a self-regulatory organization, and which I believe, I am told you will be able to maybe enlighten us more on that which self-regulatory organization is already now by about more than 55, 56 members appointed, coming from various organizations like NAREDCO, Mumbai Grahak Panchayat, CREDAI, MCHI and so on. This is one of the, but it's not a statutory remedy, it's a conciliatory remedy, equivalent to mediation, etc. We therefore now go only to the statutory remedies which are permissible under the provisions of the Act. By virtue of the provisions of Section 79 of RERA, it was contended by some that the jurisdiction of the civil courts is ousted to entertain any proceedings or suits covering the subjects which are covered by the provisions of RERA. And questions were then being raised and argued whether as a result of that, the remedy under the Consumer Protection Act would still be open. This confusion was also extended in view of the provision in the Act that the previous proceedings which were pending under the consumer forums at various levels, whether it is state, district, wherever, can be withdrawn and continued under RERA, giving an impression as though that then they have to stand terminated and the proceedings have to be transferred to the RERA authority. But that is a misconception. That is a provision which was made giving an option either to continue there or to transfer that over under in the authorities under the RERA. But Consumer Protection Forum, not being a civil court, continues to enjoy the concurrent jurisdiction, and this, one can say, is now no more a grey area. In view of a recent judgment which the Division Bench of the Delhi High Court has given, in the matter of M3M on the 4th of September 19. And this judgment is based again on the judgment of the Supreme Court in the case of Pioneer Urban Land Infra. That's the case dealing with the challenge to the virus of NCLT. But while dealing with that extensively, the judgment of Justice Rohington Nariman, in fact, I would suggest to all of you who are interested, it's a very lucid judgment covering, of course, the aspects other than RERA on the constitutionality of the virus of the provisions brought in to the insolvency code, by which the provisions were made applicable also to the allottees of tenements under RERA. Now, a question therefore was whether a allottee under RERA is a financial creditor. And the arguments then, arguments raised before the Supreme Court were that it was a quid pro for the purchase of a tenement or purchase of an apartment, and therefore there is no question of a financial creditor definition being applied to an allottee under RERA. To counter this, a clarificatory provision was brought into the insolvency code by way of amendment of the definition. As I said once again, it was a clarificatory in nature and not a substantive additional provision. This will have an aspect or relevance on the context of retrospective application. And the court has ultimately upheld the virus of that amendment and has also confirmed that it's clarificatory in nature and therefore retrospective, and has held in terms, therefore, that the definition of an allottee, of course within the circumscribed provisions which are put in for the purpose of involvement, are valid, and therefore the allottees have a right under Section 7 of the Code to initiate the proceedings as also to participate in the process. Thus, therefore, the courts have held, number one, that the jurisdiction is concurrent of the Consumer Forum as also the RERA authority for redressal of certain grievances. Secondly, it is also open to have independent remedy under the provisions of the Insolvency Code by approaching the NCLT. As far as the civil courts are concerned, Section 79 makes it clear that otherwise the civil courts have no power to entertain any suit or proceedings in the matters which are covered by the provisions of RERA. As you all know, of course, that this by itself does not completely oust the jurisdiction of the civil courts under the Constitution, Article 226 or Article 32 or whatever. Therefore, certain jurisdictions of the court in any event continues, but in the ordinary course, a civil suit or a proceeding is specifically mentioned to be inapplicable and therefore is clearly barred. This, in effect, more or less covers briefly the points assigned to me, but with the time available, few minutes more, I will advert in the context to the provisions of Section 17, which deals with the transfer of title, because it has a correlation also with the matter of deemed conveyance. A mention was made initially with regard to the judgment in Jayantilal. While Mr. Thate introduced me, that was a checkered career. Mr. Sancheti also was at some stage involved in that process. It was an interesting background and an interesting evolution, but which gives rise to and exposes to various situations which were faced by the allottees on twofold aspects. A large project, phase-wise development, amenities exclusive to a particular portion or collectively to everybody, giving of rights individually to flat purchasers with regard to certain areas, for example, to a garden in front of a flat on the ground floor, or a terrace either in front of a flat or on the top of the building, and so on. As the time moves on and as the problems are seen, solutions were being found. And then it had correlation also to the changes coming in from time to time in the development control regulations, so far as Bombay is concerned, or in the development related issues elsewhere in Maharashtra. And therefore, when you enter into an agreement or take an allotment, X potentiality was there, a potentiality changed. I wouldn't attribute it even to agreed, that if you can make more out of a particular thing, you can ostensibly say that, look, housing is a need and I am therefore, by building more houses, complying with that need, and therefore I want to build more and so on. What you therefore thought of buying with a lawn in front or maybe a tennis court on the side or a swimming pool behind may drastically change. And the builders were going ahead with that in impunity and so on. And therefore, the changes had to be brought about. First, Section 7 was changed, 7A was introduced. The rights of the builders therefore were curbed. Then again, the pendulum swung and changes were brought about. And ultimately, it was rested with the introduction of 11 because people were forced ultimately to litigate. And as Mr. Sancheti mentioned, and as we all experienced, we all know the legal process, what it means for a litigant, the factor of time, the factor of cost, though of course the courts had held that court fees are not required to be paid ad valorem when it comes to enforcement of a right to conveyance, and that it's an enforcement of a statutory right, and therefore you can go under 64J, and people were filing suits and seeking reliefs and getting it. Nonetheless, reduction in stamp duty was not the sufficient relief or a solution, despite that aspect of the cost having gone down because of the other factors which continue to remain in force and so on. And it also remained a fact that the builders could possibly afford to brief Mr. Sen or Mr. Sancheti or Mr. Sate, whereas the society may or may not. And therefore, their representations also were not on an equal footing. And protection further was therefore envisaged by 11, by the provisions of the deemed conveyance. And earlier to that, the rights were to a large extent crystallized by the judgment of the Supreme Court and of the Bombay High Court in the judgment of Jayantilal, which has then taken its own course further by deemed conveyance and by the provisions of RERA. Still, one cannot say with confidence that what has been achieved so far is a full and a complete remedy, or that it is without any hurdles or it is without any possibilities of the evil still not being continued in some form or the other, either on account of the human elements, as will be known more to our friend who is going to speak next, at the level of the implementation, for lack of knowledge, lack of understanding, or various other factors which I can mention. But those difficulties are continued to be faced to some extent, but still minimized. You can't have a complete solution to all the problems at one go. We must mercifully thank our government for being conscious to the evils and to finding the solutions to that. And with that, I'll rest. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Gilani, for giving us the clear propositions of law that MOFA applies so far as it is not inconsistent with RERA, and therefore deemed conveyance is still alive, and Consumer Forum still continues to exercise a concurrent jurisdiction. The few provisions of RERA were brought into force in May 2016, and few other provisions were brought into force from May 2017. So we have seen a considerable time in which RERA has worked. We have Mr. Harshad Bhadbade, who is the president of the RERA bar, to enlighten us about the practical difficulties in implementation of RERA. May I now request Mr. Bhadbade to address our members.
President of the bar, Sathe sir, Viren sir, all the seniors who are present here, and my dear friends. To begin with, In the year 1960, considering the malpractices which were being committed in construction industry, a committee was appointed to submit its report, which was submitted in the year 1961. Based on that report, MOFA came in the year 1963, mainly with an intention to promote construction. So also certain disclosures were required under MOFA. In 2010 onwards, though various amendments were made to MOFA, it was realized by the government that MOFA has failed to deliver the results which were expected because there was no regulatory authority and there was no adjudicatory authority. The only remedy available was either to file a consumer complaint or a suit, which was taking time, and so something more faster was required, and therefore Maharashtra, as was said by Sir, came up with Maharashtra Housing Regulation and Development Act. Now this act was sent for presidential assent. Pending that assent, Government of India realized that similar act is required throughout India, and therefore they came up with RERA in the year 2016. Now based on RERA, Maharashtra was amongst the first to come up with its rules under RERA, which are called Maharashtra Rules 2017. Now today we will look at these particular rules and the act from the angle where they have failed to provide speedy remedy, or rather they have failed to provide any remedy at all. As I said, now it would be interesting to note that MOFA, as you all are aware, is applicable to each and every flat purchaser or even a person who is going in that apartment. But now RERA applies only to flat purchaser. What does it mean? It means that it doesn't apply to those who are going in redevelopment societies, to slum rehabilitations. It doesn't apply. Now if we talk about Mumbai, which is I can say one of the reasons why MOFA came into picture, why Maharashtra Housing Regulation and Development came into picture, is the number of redevelopment projects which are going on. So RERA has failed to provide any answer to the problems of those who are in process of rehabilitation, reconstruction or slum projects. This is, I think, one of the biggest failures when it comes to RERA, because it is not coming to the help of those poor people who are waiting for redevelopment of their projects for over 20 years, 30 years, 15 years, and it is of not help. Second aspect, the difference between MOFA and RERA, or one of the most discussed difference, was RERA mandates a promoter to maintain a separate bank account, wherein he has to deposit 70% of the entire collection from sale, and he can withdraw that amount proportionate to completion of the project on the basis of 3 certificates which are to be issued by chartered accountant, the architect and the engineer of the project. Now when Maharashtra rules came along with the format of chartered accountant certificate and rule 4. Now they were designed in such a manner that it negated the entire purpose of section 4 of RERA. So now what Maharashtra rules do, if you see the format of the chartered accountant certificates, we are all lawyers, I do understand, we won't understand the calculation, but it says proportion of the project and the cost incurred. And then 6 says multiplied with the cost of the project. So the turnout is you can withdraw every amount which is otherwise incurred by the promoter. Now thereafter there are certain circulars which are issued by the authority which says that even what is called as advance payment can be treated as an expenses incurred and can be withdrawn from the sales account. The whole idea, I think, of introducing this 70% concept was the misuse by builders of the money which they used to collect from one project. They used to transfer it to another project, and then both the projects got stuck. So to control this misuse, this 70% bank account maintenance concept was introduced, which now got negated because of Maharashtra amendment. The third aspect, in my opinion, while practicing on RERA, which I notice is that Now, of course, there are designated senior counsel sitting here who some or the other day would be arguing this in the courts. Those projects which are not registered with RERA, complaints are not entertained. So, a builder is given benefit of his own wrongdoing. So, if a builder chooses not to register a complaint and there is a complaint by allottee to be filed against him, it is dismissed, or there is no provision on the website itself to file a complaint against that. There was a petition filed, there is an order passed by Honorable High Court that there is no such distinction between unregistered project and registered project, and you have to entertain the complaint. But still, as on date, what is happening is unregistered project, there is a separate provision, there is a separate format for the complaint, and it is not being heard like the regular complaint. So that is the biggest drawback, I think, which is happening. Now, the fourth one, which I think is even more serious, is, as we all know, that builder was expected to disclose date of completion of the project on the website. Now, whether it has got a retrospective effect or a prospective effect, we are all aware that builders have been giving dates in the allotment letter agreements, different dates to different purchasers. So there is a project which started by saying that it will have a project completion date of 15, then 16, then 17. When RERA came, finally the builder declared on the project that, all right, I'll complete it by December 19. So initially, for ongoing projects, there were two dates given on the website itself. One, the date which was already disclosed to the allottees, and two, now extended date which you want to do, or which you promise now to complete the project. Now, many builders have then given a date of 31st December 2019 as a completion date. As the data goes, just to give a quick update, Maharashtra, as I said, tops registration of project with, when the RERA came into in 2016, we registered about 17,000 projects. As of now, we have 24,000 registered projects, which makes 50% of entire country that is registered in Maharashtra itself. Now, as far as those dates are concerned, the compliance part of it, it was expected that out of 17,000 registered projects, 8,000 projects had given date of 31st December 19 to complete, out of which 4,000 completed, 4,000 are incomplete. Now the view taken by RERA authority is that those projects which have not been completed or which extension is elapsed, certificate is elapsed, again the complaints are not maintainable. So they say we will take suo motu action against those for defaulting into the projects. But as far as singular complaint of allottee is concerned, it is not being entertained on the ground that the registration has elapsed. Now, to deal with this situation, the answer lies in section 18. Section 18 clearly says that if such a situation arises, then I have right to exit from the project with my money and interest. Now, we will see the practical view which are taken by the authorities. They have interpreted the preamble of RERA Act says that it has come into existence for regulation and promotion of real estate sector, point number 1. Point number 2, to bring in transparency in the real estate sector. Point number 3 is consumer interest. Point number 4 is to regulate. And point number 5 is to provide appellate mechanism for this. So these are the 5 basic ingredients for coming of RERA into existence. Now, if you see preamble of RERA, it is interestingly mentioned that for speedy adjudication of dispute. Now, all can Google it, what is the difference between adjudication and a judgment. A judgment, I will not go into the details of what is the difference between a judgment and adjudication, but in a process to settle this dispute, what is called as adjudication, as sir was just now informing, they have formed SROs, there are conciliation forums, lawyers are not allowed in the conciliation forums. In fact, it is placed on the website that lawyers are not allowed. You are not supposed to attend the meetings of conciliation. And these forums consist of course, builders, some from Grahak Pancha, consumer protections, and other people who are attending this and trying to settle the dispute. They claim that they have a fantastic settlement dispute. So just to give an idea of what I think about this whole process, I'm too young to comment upon any single person's judgments or capacities or his views taken, especially when I was told that there is a gentleman with 50 years of practice. I'm too young to comment, but to conclude my submissions on time, I'll just give a example, what I think of a judgment, what I think of adjudication, which happens in tribunals, because my personal views of using non-judicial officers to resolve disputes is not favorable. My experience, last 20 years practice, when I have appeared before non-judicial officers, has not been so good. So just to put how I take it, I'll give one example. It's a normal example which every lawyer must have heard one or the other day. I have just distorted it to put the way I think. So here is this Ram and Sham case where they have 17 cows and seek partition. They go for a judgment first. So when they go for a judgment, first set of litigation goes up to Supreme Court to decide who will get that odd cow. That is that 17 number cow. 8 you can partition. Who will get that 17 number cow? The second set of litigation again goes up to Supreme Court to decide who will get the cow and who will get the 50% share of that or price of that cow. The third set goes how to decide the value of that cow. And finally the judgment comes, in my view, the judgment says 8 goes to Ram, 8 goes to Sham. The 17 is a bullock which belongs to a village, and he has right to stay 30 days with these cows, 30 days with the other cows. So that is how the judgment is. Now you will ask how the adjudication is. So adjudication, sorry, one sentence I forgot. In the entire process, all the 17 cows are dead. Now, how the adjudication process? So adjudication, in my views, please again pardon me, all seniors are sitting here. Adjudication, the adjudicating officer is smart. He says these judicial officers and lawyers are useless. You come to me, I'll sort it out. He says, how many cows you two have? They say 17. All right, take my cow. Now how many cows you have? He asks Sham. How many cows are there? Sham says 18. All right, give 9 to Ram. Done, partition 9 to Ram. Now he asks Sham, how many cows are left? He says 9. Okay, I'll take mine back. Now how much are left? There are 8. He says, what are your claim? He says, I'm claiming 50%. All right, you take 4. 4 given to Ram, 4 given to Sham. And then the adjudicating officer records in his judgment. 13 goes to Ram, 4 goes to Sham, and the cows are happy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bhadbade, for telling us about the practical difficulties in implementation of RERA and the entertaining story about cows. We have a 10-minute question and answer session. Only 2 requests that please, when you are asking a question, use a mic. And second, please also tell the number of a member of the panel to whom you are asking a question.
Yeah, my question is that an agreement for sale registered under RERA is having an arbitration clause. So then what are the consequences? We have to go for arbitration first, or we can go for other remedies as contemplated. And second part is if the refund with interest and compensation, but what about the GST, the stamp duty and the other charges? So these are my 2 questions. Anybody on the panel can answer?
Anyway, I don't think the mic will be mine. So far as arbitration is concerned, there is nothing which excludes the applicability of the Arbitration Act. And that non-obstant clause, which is there in the Act, does not exclude the applicability of the provisions of the arbitration. But it's not a compulsion. You can initiate the process under the Arbitration Act.
But what if I don't want to go in the arbitration?
you can go for the remedies under the provisions of RERA, but the other party, who is also a party to the Arbitration Act, has the remedies under the Arbitration Act if he wants to follow. Those remedies are not excluded.
The developer has put a clause in the agreement that any dispute arising under this agreement, we have to go for arbitration. So that means initially arbitration has to be.
That does not amount to a compulsion. It means that you can invoke the provisions of the Arbitration Act. If one party doesn't want to invoke the provisions under the contract of the arbitration, it is up to him. He can be forced if the procedure by the other party is adopted, say by applying under provisions of Section 11 under the Arbitration Act for appointment of arbitration and so on, and other provisions. The bottom line is that provisions of Arbitration Act are not excluded, and therefore recourse to that is permissible. But it is not a condition precedent. Exhausting remedies under the Arbitration Act is not a condition precedent to invoking provisions under RERA.
So he can't force first we have to go for arbitration and then only we can go for other remedies or other options that are available under the various.
You follow the process under the Arbitration Act, and it is then for the court to take up the matter when you apply under 11 for the appointment of an arbitrator and to proceed further.
No, sir, my question is.
Your question, I follow, it's in the context of a stay of a suit under the Civil Procedure Code, that when you apply for an arbitration, if there is a suit is kept pending. If there is a pendency of a suit. Here there is no question of a pendency of a suit. Here is a question of whether you apply under RERA or you apply under Arbitration Act. And whether, your question as I understand is this, that do you have to first exhaust remedy under Arbitration Act before you apply under RERA? The answer is no.
So the flat purchaser, instead of going for arbitration, he can straight away go.
Certainly.
And the developer can't raise a dispute to that?
No, therefore I am again clarifying. It's not therefore that the...
I'll give you an example. There is a dispute between a financer and a borrower. The financer happens to be a bank covered under the DRT Act. And the agreement also has an arbitration clause. You can go to arbitration or you can go to DRT. Both the options are available to whoever party wants to initiate the action. If the other party wants to say not here but please go to arbitration, he'll have to take recourse to Section 8 then. But the person who is initiating the proceeding has a choice where he wants to go. Am I clear?
Okay. And the
Compensation. You can also, if you file a complaint before the RERA authority under Section 31 for seeking exit under Section 18, then you will get your money back with interest, and you can also claim compensation for whatever problems which you have faced because
tax
of
and
the situation.
the stamp duty, all that will fall
Yes, you get stamp duty as well as GST return. There is a provision under the Stamp Duty Act itself that within 1 year the money will go to the promoter, not to you. But the promoter is directed to pay the money to you by the authority.
And what about the GST?
There is no interest which you will get on GST and stamp duty, because that the money was lying with the government. You will get interest from the promoter on the amount which was paid by you to the promoter.
Right.
And GST also, of course, you will get it back.
I will add that
You can seek a compensation. Yes.
if that is a loss to the user's pocket, he can say this is because of the wrongdoing of the promoter. So while I get the stamp duty and GST in a particular fashion, the interest on that is also a loss to me
Correct.
that will come under compensation.
And that is given.
Mr. Manwane, the project period is delayed by 2 years. The developer says you take the notional interest, notional rent for 2 years, not the interest. What I should do?
See, what you are entitled to is SBI money lending rate plus 2%, which is equivalent to 10.45%. Now it is 10.65%. That is what you are entitled to. But if you have a practical approach to it, normal approach of the authority is to condone delay of 6 months to 1 year in that particular project on various grounds. Authority has powers to condone delay up to 1 year. So you calculate what is the rent you are going to get, you calculate 10.45% interest, and then you decide whether you want to stay with the project with the rent or you want, that will be a practical decision rather than a,
Interest is better for me. But if I insist for the interest,
Yes.
the builder may not give me possession. Further, I am delayed.
no. He can't, see, if you get interest, that interest will continue till you get the possession. It is not interest up to the judgment, the interest is up to you get possession. So builder will be in a hurry to give you possession.
Third, supplementary question, which court is better for me? Is it RERA or consumer court?
Consumer court takes 3.5 years for disposal of the complaint. RERA takes approximately now 1 year.
Okay, thank you so much. I hope everybody is benefited by my questions. No?
A building has say 35 floors and the builder has given part OC to up to the 30th floor. Now what are the obligations of the builder for the last 30th to the 31st to the 35th floor as regards conveyance, interest and other things? I mean conveyance for all.
See, I'll tell you, this is a new concept which is introduced by RERA now. Now they called it phase-wise registration of the project. So there is a possibility that builder has registered phase-wise project of 1 to 30 floors as phase 1, and then that is completed. And then he is going ahead with a project 2, which is phase 2, which is of 30 to 35th floor. So now what is your exact question? What do you...
See, the original completion date is same for all.
Correct.
But the builder has given position only up to the 30th floor.
Correct. So for those people who are there from 30th to 35th floor, they can always complain that we are not given possession, and the same remedy under, as was told, section 12, section 18 will apply. You can still get compensation on and the interest on the part of amount paid till you get the possession.
And what about the other things such as the registration of the society and conveyance?
See, the society registration has got nothing to do with occupation certificate. The Act says if 51% of the apartments are sold, then there are steps to be taken for registration of the society. Conveyance will be after occupation within 3 months. In the Act it is provided, if not provided in the local acts. So look.
Occupation of the first 30 floors or up to the
35th floor. They will.
So they will have more time for conveyance.
Correct. So he will apply for extension now, and you can take an objection if you want to.
My question is regarding the jurisdiction of the RERA. So far I know, those who are staying in Nagpur and Aurangabad, all along they have come to Mumbai. So why not so many circuit branch like Bombay High Court has a division, branches is Nagpur, Aurangabad and this. There must be some branches
See,
all along there.
they have at Pune, they are coming up with, at Nagpur they are coming up. And
But still now no,
it is
nothing,
there.
because people
In
are
Pune it
coming
is-
from Nagpur and Aurangabad.
I'm sorry.
I know that people are coming from Aurangabad and Nagpur to do Bombay.
See, as I said, initially it was only Bombay, but now they have extended it to Pune and they are extending it to Nagpur also. And Nasik also is under consideration.
Not all districts.
I can't answer
That's a
that.
consumer code as in all districts. And the next my question is, in a redevelopment project, section 715 you are telling, sometimes I've seen that during the project work, all on a sudden the first promoter is transferring all things to the third party. And those who are gone for the allotee, they are getting the money for the rental purpose. Sometimes the third party, they have stopped it. So many cases has come, stopped it, rented, suppose 60,000 or 80,000 like that. At that time, what will they do, the allotee, if they have stopped well, we have in contact with the first, not or the third party.
You go to
So
High
what time
Court in
I'll-
one-stop shop, you'll get the answers.
Yes. One more question.
Rightly said that 4 cows given, the identifying officer probably gives 4 cows to one and the 4 cows to the other.
That was a joke, take
I
it
know,
lightly.
but actually, this is actually happening.
I have to appear in tribunals, please.
But that's what. But that's what Mr. Chatterjee is doing. He says you can take interest even if you want to exit, but you are not entitled to compensation. So what is the answer? Though the provision says that
Look,
you...
Mr. Chatterjee, as you are aware, is a chairperson. He is not an adjudicating officer. And you should have insisted for transferring the complaint to adjudicating officer who will decide the compensation. Chatterjee has no powers, yes. No, highest officer won't get the compensation.
For compensation, you go to 71 adjudicating officer, who is a judicial officer.
Okay.
So you have to tell it there that this is a complaint.
Okay, so even if I have to exit, I still...
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you.
If the developer has given the allotment letter, possession letter, and he has handed over the possession also, the buyer has made the full payment, 100% payment, but the agreement was not executed, and the developer has sold the same flat to one more person, and that agreement was executed. What will be my remedy in that case?
Possession is with whom?
Possession is with me, but my agreement was not executed, and
One of the two of you will get money back with interest and compensation.
okay.
But some court or the other will decide between the two who retains possession and who gets the compensation and the money back.
But I am possessing. Yeah, I have allotment letter, but the possession letter is fit out possession letter. It's a fit out possession. The possession letter is a fit out possession.
It summarizes the terms on which this flat was to be sold to you.
Yeah, it was.
Paid all of the amount.
No, nothing was. My amount was also paid. Everything is been. But only thing is that when the second seller who has purchased the flat, he has cleverly mortgaged the said flat with the bank, and the account got NPA. And right now I am residing in the flat, and the auction notice what came. When I applied in a DRT, I had failed to get a stay from that. So in this case, there can be any remedy which will stop the possession of the auction of the said flat.
Effectively, although the person at fault is the builder, but the fight is about a right between two private individuals claiming right to the same property. Ultimately, it will become a civil suit and you'll have to go to civil court.
My one more question is, if you permits, if in a case the developer has sold, it was a commercial place, the allotment was made to me, everything was in the agreement, he included the parking was also being to allot me, but afterwards the parking was allotted to some other person. Now issue is that my client has stopped to paying the maintenance of the said building because he has not been given the parking space, and it was included in the agreement also. So in that case, what will be the remedy for me? Because now he has initiated actions against me to pay the recovery proceeding, to pay the maintenance. So in that case, what will be the remedy?
See, this dispute regarding parking, first of all, it is for the society to allot the parking, correct? So point number one is answered. Now, if you have dispute with the society regarding accounts, you file dispute with the cooperative court.
Thank you so much.
We have now come to the last part of the workshop today. Thank you to all our speakers today, Mr. Sancheti, Mr. Sen, Mr. Ghelani, Mr. Bhadbade. I am sure that our members are hugely benefited by today's talk, particularly the junior members. On behalf of the association, may I now request Ms. Pallavi Bali to present a small memento on behalf of the Bar Association to Mr. Sancheti, please. Mr. Naveen Bhatia to present a memento to Mr. J.P. Sen as a token of our appreciation. Mr. Manik Kalyaniwala to present a memento to Mr. Ghelani. Mr. Ankush Saraf to present a memento to Mr. Bhadbade. I also thank the staff of the Bombay Bar Association for helping us organizing today's workshop. Thank you all. Have a nice weekend.